Good morning. I'm Richard Blackaby, and I want to welcome you to the Tuesday morning devotional once again. Always good to be with you, and we've heard some great feedback from folks who've been watching this, sometimes with their families and stopping, just taking a break at work or watching it later. And so we're delighted to be with you. Last week, I talked about the seasons of God based on this book that I wrote a couple of years ago. And we talked about the timing of God and how successful people are people that match their activities with the timing of God. You can do the right thing, but do it too soon or do it too late. And this week, I want us to look specifically at the seasons of God. And Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1, it says, to everything there is a season. And we touched on that last week to say that nothing stays the same. Because it has seasons, it means that it has change to it. So whether you're talking about your marriage, whether you're talking about your role at your work, whether you're talking about your role as a parent, whether you're talking about your walk with God, they all have seasons to them. And we ought to not be caught by surprise when things change. And so I want you to look for a few moments at some of the seasons that we're most familiar with. And in North America, at least, we know 4 seasons. Now, if you're one of my friends down in Arizona, you have 2 seasons. You have hot and really hot. But for a lot of us, there's 4. And of course, the first season that we're in right now is spring. And when you think about spring, you think of beginnings. You think about planting seeds on a farm. You think about potential. You could plant 1,000,000 seeds during the day, and that doesn't mean that you can eat anything that you planted by the end of that same day. It's all about the future. It's about the hope of what could be. It's about doing something new, perhaps that you've not done before. And there's a wonderful passage in Isaiah chapter 43, verses 18 and following. And God is speaking to the Israelites. And the Israelites have been through a hard time. They've been judged because of their sin. Enemy nations have invaded and destroyed many of the villages. It's caused all kinds of hardship. It's been very bleak for the people. And then the prophet Isaiah comes and has this word. He says, "Do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I will even make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." And I love that declaration of God when he says, "Behold, I will do a new thing." Now, he's not saying forget everything that's ever happened in your past. What he's saying is what I'm going to do next is going to blow you away. He's saying, I don't do all my best work when you're just young. I've got some great stuff still to show you. So don't focus on the past, because that's not where you're headed. You're headed into the future. So keep your eye there. We're not driven in our lives by where we've come from, but by where we're going, where God's taking us. That's what God says, I'm going to do a new thing. Now, you need to understand that over the course of your life, you may have a number of springtimes. Whenever you think of spring, you think of geese returning. You think of buds, blossoms out on the trees. You watch little plants bursting through the ground, and there's an excitement in the air. Now, here in Georgia, we've already had temperatures well into the 80s, but in most places, it's still kind of a little cool in the mornings. The heat of summer has not struck yet. And there's an excitement in the air about what will grow this year, what will spring forth. And over the course of your life, you will actually have a number of springtimes. This is one of the things I didn't realize at first. I first assumed that springtime was about when you were young, when you were a teenager, when you were in your 20s. Though that was the springtime of your life. And by the time you're at retirement age, you're more into your winter. But the more I studied Scripture, the more I realized that actually we will go through a number of springtimes. Springtime is always when God ushers in a new time in our life, a new stage in our life. So when you're born, for instance, when I was born, I was a preschooler, and I started out in spring. I didn't even know how to speak. I didn't even know who my parents were when I first met them. But in springtime, it's a time of beginning, and eventually you move into summer, which is when you begin to mature and grow and strengthen yourself and learn to walk and so on and learn to talk. But as a preschooler, I was born in springtime. And then at a certain point, I had a new springtime come, and I entered into elementary school. Again, every time you go into a spring, there's an excitement. It also can be frightening because you may be starting something entirely new you've never done before. And of course, with that comes fears and concerns. What if I don't have what it takes? What if I don't fit in? What if I am not good at this job? What if I don't do well in school? What if I don't make any friends? All kinds of concerns you have in elementary school. But then eventually you learn the ropes and you make friends, and it becomes old hat, and you develop as an elementary school student. And right about the time, by the 8th grade, when you think you're the top of the hill, you're now in the harvest season of your life as an elementary school student. Winter sets in and you graduate, and now you go to high school. And all of a sudden you're with enormous people. I remember going to high school, and just a few months before, I was at the top of the food chain in my elementary school in 8th grade. And then a few months later, I'm this scrawny, scared freshman in high school. There's behemoth football players on the senior football team strutting around with facial hair, and I'm just trying to not be noticed and blend in. And again, it's a springtime for me. It's exciting. You see this huge school and all these new classes and students and sports, but you also have certain fears, wondering, do I have what it takes? Then eventually you get to the top of the food chain in high school, and you graduate. Winter comes again, and then the next thing you know, you're going to university or you're going into the job force, and it's new again. And once again, your heart is racing and you're wondering, do I have what it takes? I remember going to my first job as a pastor, and you walk in the doors of that church and you look around, and you know that there have been problems and challenges and all kinds of people's expectations, and you wonder to yourself, do I have what it takes? And then I remember going into becoming a seminary president. And when I was elected president of a seminary, it was a new springtime for me. I had success as a pastor. There's a part of me that just wanted to stay where I was successful. Why do something new when you found something that works? But I'll just tell you this. There's just something, I think, that's built into human nature that needs a fresh challenge, that needs to be stretched, that needs to face something bigger than what they've faced before. And I remember walking into that seminary and just being so nervous. I was the youngest employee on the payroll when I got there. And a lot of PhD professors, opinionated, brilliant men, all thinking they knew more than I did about running that school. And here I am trying to give guidance to all these opinionated, strong personality types, and wondering, do I have what it takes? Will they follow me? Will they listen to me? Will this school go bankrupt on my watch? Will anybody want to enroll as a student? And all these fears and knowing I've got to grow, I've got to rise to another level if I'm going to make this thing work. And I would just tell you that I think that there are some people that spend most of their life just playing it safe, just staying in the same job they've had for 40 years because they know how to do it. It takes nothing. They don't ever have to grow. They don't have to stretch. But when you stop growing, you start dying. And you may be one of those people that perhaps it's been a while since God has done a new thing in your life. I want to just encourage you, it doesn't matter how old you are, God always has another springtime for you. I grew up in Canada, and some of those winters seemed like they would never end. But inevitably, no matter how brutal the winter might be, eventually spring came, and there was newness and plants coming out. And I've had so many wonderful people tell me their stories. I suppose one of those that was most impactful to me was a wonderful woman named Nell. Some of you may have heard me tell this story. I tell the story in the Seasons book. Nell was 66 years old. She was a widow. She was crippled, couldn't walk very well. And she had gone to church faithfully all of her life, but basically had never seen God do anything special in her life. And one day she saw her church was offering a witnessing class, and she had never talked to anybody about Jesus, never told anyone, never invited anybody to church. But she decided to take this class, and God changed her life through it. On the very last day, she was going with her pastor to visit someone. The pastor is talking to the husband and wife, and suddenly a teenage girl comes around the corner. Nell begins talking to this young lady, and the next thing she knows, she's leading this young lady to pray the sinner's prayer, to asking God to forgive her of her sins and to become a Christian. Well, Nell's so excited that she goes home, gets a book out, a notebook, and on page 1, she writes the girl's name, writes the date, and writes the circumstances where she prayed with this person. And then she prays and says, God, this is the most exciting day I've ever had in my life. There's someone who'll spend an eternity in heaven because of what you did today. God, before I die, I'm 66 years old. I don't know how much longer I've got. Before I die, would you just let me lead one more person to faith in Christ? Well, the next week she's at a doctor's office, and again, she prays with someone, leads them to Christ. This woman is very concerned. She's afraid she's facing cancer and doesn't know God and is afraid for her future. And there's Nell, prays with her, leads her to Christ, goes home, gets out her little book, writes in number 2, writes that woman's name. And she begins to regularly lead people to faith in Christ, to offer hope for eternity. She writes all those names in her book. By the time I got to know her, she had turned 80 years old when I actually got to meet with her in her home. And I remember going to her house and sitting down at her kitchen table with her, and I said, Nell, I want to see that book. And she had the book with her. She slid it over to me, and I'm flipping through the pages trying to find the total number of people that she has actually had pray to become a Christian with her. Finally, I find the number, and it's 3,147. And I remember looking at Nell, who's 80 at the time, and I said, Nell, until you were 66 years old, you never even told anybody about Jesus. And in the last 14 years, you've actually led 3,147 people to pray and to become a Christian. I said, how do you explain that? And I'll never forget, she looked at me and said, Richard, one day God just convinced me that there was something new he wanted to do in my life. Now, I want to tell you something. She was 66 years old, and certainly the greatest work God had for her still lay in her future, not behind her. And some of you may just need to be encouraged today to know that God has a new springtime for you as well. You may have gone through a bleak time. Maybe you've been through the loss of a loved one. Maybe you've been through a divorce. Maybe you've been let go of your job. And you're just wondering, is that it? Are my best days behind me? Well, with God, there's always another springtime. And then the second season, just to mention for a moment, is summer. And if you're on the farm, you know that that's when the heat comes. That's when the sunshiny days are taking place. And you may have planted corn or wheat, and now it's bursting forth up from the ground. And the sun is beating down. If you're working on that farm, it's hot, it's sweaty. You're toiling, and yet you can work hard all day. And at the end of the day, you still can't eat that corn. It's not ripe yet. But that seed, that heat bearing down, is making it right. And I call this in terms of parenting, I call this the minivan season of life, where you're working hard raising these kids. And sometimes there's not a lot of rewards. It's just a lot of labor. And you can get tired of that. Or maybe the springtime is when you get a new job. But the summer is when you have to learn how to master that job. And you put in the time, and you go to seminars, and you put in extra hours learning how to do the job. I love for summer, I think a great verse for that is Galatians 6:9. Paul says, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. And in spring, I would say sometimes the temptation is to feel overwhelmed. I don't know if I can do this. But in summer, the temptation is to grow weary and to say, I've been working really hard. When I took this job, when I started this company, when I offered to teach this class, when I became the pastor of this church, it was exciting. There was a honeymoon period, but now the heat is on, and people expect a lot, and it's a lot of work, and I'm not seeing a harvest yet. And so the temptation is to want to quit, to move on to some place that perhaps will be easier. I remember several years ago speaking at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove to a bunch of military chaplains. And one chaplain, I was talking about the seasons, and one chaplain came up to me and he said, "Richard, this is exactly what I've been experiencing." He said, "I was assigned to a new post. It was a springtime for me." He said, "I walked in, I was brand new people, new environment, and I tried to figure things out. I tried to get my bearings." He said, "And I began to work. I moved into a summer season of Bible studies and ministry and holding services." But he said, "I just wasn't getting much of a response." He said, "People just weren't that interested. They didn't call me up. Few people were attending the services. And so we just worked harder and we worked harder." But he said, my wife and I looked at each other and said, maybe this is a mistake. Maybe we just need to put in to be transferred somewhere else, because it just seems that there's nothing happening. There's no fruitfulness here. And he said, then one day, I can't explain it. He said, nothing was different. Everything was being done the same way it had been done before. But he said, all I can tell you is the harvest came. And he said, suddenly the auditorium is filling up with people attending the services. Suddenly people are calling me and wanting to meet with me. People are making decisions for Christ, he said. And now he said, we're working night and day. He said, the harvest has come in. And I would just tell you this, sometimes you can't explain it except that you've just put in the time in spring and summer, and at a certain point, God is just pleased to say, now you're going to reap what you've sown. And interestingly, he said, winter's coming for me now. He said, I'm about to hit my 20-year retirement. And he said, we're plucking with both hands, he said, because we don't want to leave any fruit on the vines that we were assigned to harvest. And so summer is the season of work and maturity, and fall is a time of harvest. Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. And that can be an encouraging thing. It can also be a discouraging thing, because if you don't put much in, you're not going to get much out. And I always tell people, I'm not a prophet, but I can pretty well predict your future. If you tell me what you've been sowing, I'll predict what you're going to reap. There's so many examples of that. I remember when I was leading a seminary, every year we would bring in someone to teach a workshop on marriage, and we would put a lot of money into that. We'd bring in very good speakers. We would provide a wonderful meal for couples who went to our school, and we just tried to bless people with gifts and just try to bless our students' marriages. But interestingly, do you know there were always some that would just not be able, even though we provided free child care, provided free meals, everything was free, there were still some who lived right on the property with us in student housing who could not navigate themselves just to walk over to the academic building and receive the free blessing of their marriage. And do you know who those people typically were? They were typically the ones who had the worst marriages. All the couples with strong marriages were there because they took advantage of every opportunity to bless their marriage. The same thing would happen every spring. We would have a seminar on parenting, trying to bless people's families, give them skills in raising their kids. Do you know what students always made it to those parenting seminars? All the students with the best kids, with the best families. Why? Because they always did that. They always took advantage. Do you know the families that could not navigate to get there and learn how to be better parents? They were the ones whose kids were the most out of control, and the kids that were a terror to the nursery workers at church. And I just learned that when I see people's lives, when I see their marriages, when I see their kids, when I see their jobs, what they're reaping, what they've sown. I remember knowing a young man at one point that went to seminary. He felt called to be a pastor, but he was kind of on the lazy side. He didn't want to. He kept saying, "Why work any harder than you have to?" Now he was smart. He could get by with a lot, but he'd come into class and there was going to be a quiz. Everybody else would be studying. He would just be kicking back saying, look, why are you killing yourselves? Why be stressed out? He said, you know what? If you get a D in this class or a C in this class, you're going to get a church just like if you got an A+. So why stress it? And so sure enough, he got C's all the way through, even though he was a brilliant person. Well, he got out and he became a pastor, just like he said. He was kind of laughing to everybody else. See, I've got a church. I'm a pastor, just like you. You're an A student who got stressed getting A's. I'm a C student, no stress at all. But eventually, he decided he didn't really enjoy being a pastor. What he really enjoyed was teaching people how to be a pastor. He decided he wanted to be a professor, so he went down to the local school, offered to teach. He said, that's my gifting, that's my passion. But they said, well, the accrediting agencies won't let you teach unless you have a doctor's degree. And so now he's got to go back to school and get a doctor's degree. He turned in his transcript, turned in his applications, and guess what his school said? His school said, we can't admit C students into our doctoral program. Well, all of a sudden, doors were closing to him. He never did get his doctor's degree, never did become a professor. He reaped what he had sown. I hear so many people say, well, I just don't like school. I just don't like studying. Well, you know what? I can't say necessarily that I liked everything about school either, but I wanted to sow as much as I could into my life. That's what education is. It's sowing into your life so that you have a greater capacity later to reap. Some of the things that you delay gratification for is a way of sowing into your life with more potential so that you can have a greater harvest later. Well, finally, it's always a challenge to try to get through a whole book in a session, but the last season is winter. And for many people, winter is the one season we don't really like because it's a time of endings. It's a time when things die and close and stop. John 12, verse 24, it says, most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. In other words, sometimes unless something dies in your life, unless something ends in your life, there's no room for something new to be birthed into your life. And I'll tell you something, I mentioned this last week. I was always taught to start things. I was never taught how to end things. We don't end things well. And what happens is, as a result, is that it becomes obvious that it's time for us to stop something. And it becomes obvious to everyone around us that we need to. For instance, I've known pastors that were wonderful men of God, and for years they did a great work, but they were getting older, and they've run out of fresh ideas. They've run out of fresh sermons. Now they're just repeating the same sermons. People have heard the same stories over and over again. There's no creative new ministry. Some of their associates and staff people are leaving because the church has no direction. There's no energy, no vision. But the pastor has made this commitment. He's just never going to retire. He doesn't think retirement's in the Bible. So even though he's doing a terrible job and everything is in decline, he plans to stay there for another 10 years. And people in the church are saying, we love this man. He's a wonderful person. He's been a great pastor to us over the years. But it's clear that winter has set in. And if you stay longer than you should, all you end up doing is hurting everyone around you. Now, folks, retirement isn't in the Bible, but getting a new assignment is. And not staying when you're no longer fruitful is. And when you're no longer seeing growth in your ministry, when you're not seeing an excitement, a passion, a vision anymore with the organization that you lead, it may well be that what you're seeing is that winter has set in. And I'll tell you, I've known some people that did a great job for years, but they couldn't tell that all the leaves were turning colors around them and that fall had set in and winter was coming. Everybody else could tell, but they couldn't. And you know something I've discovered just about human nature, and that is that we're not good at evaluating when our own skills are declining. People that used to be a good preacher, they're not anymore. And I've had pastors say this to me. They'll say, well, I don't know why no one asked me to preach anymore. Well, folks, let me tell you something. If no one is asking you to preach anymore, it's because they don't think you're any good anymore. You don't have the skill set you used to have. It may be time to let winter bring an end to certain activities so that now God can bring a new springtime that matches your skills, matches your abilities and your age. But if you stay too long, it's just a recipe for frustration. And what I've discovered is that for a lot of people, we don't handle winter well. We resist it, we fight it, we're scared of it, and primarily because we're afraid God won't have another springtime for us. Well, if I walk away from this job as pastor, will there be anything left for me? Right now I have this position. Should I just hold on to it with all my might? Or do I want to just walk away and trust God will have something new? You see, if you don't walk away, there's no opportunity for God to do something new. My wife hates clutter, and so she's always decluttering, and that means she'll go into my closet and be pulling out shirts that I haven't worn for a while, and she'll say, when was the last time you wore this tie? When was the last time you wore this shirt? Let's give it to Goodwill. I think, well, but on the right circumstance, if leap year falls on on a Sunday, and we're speaking about this, I'll need that particular tie. And my wife would just say, when your closet is overflowing with clothes you never wear, there's no room for anything. You could add something new and you wouldn't even know where it was. So let declutter. And that's what winter is all about. It's about decluttering your life. It's about getting rid of some activities that have not been fruitful for years. You may have served on the same committee for the last 20 years. It's just time to get off and have a new challenge in a new area. Let someone new come in your place that has fresh ideas. And don't be afraid of that. Every organization I've ever left, I've left it in the best shape that it's been in, at its height. And I'll tell you what, that's the time to leave. Don't wait till everything is in bad shape and there's hardly anybody left. Get something going great, and then be open if God may right then say, well, everything is going wonderfully. Let's move you on to another place, because behold, I want to do a new thing. I've got another springtime. I find even sometimes with relationships, it's this way. I think even friendships sometimes they have a life cycle to them. And now God wants to do something new in your life. He wants to put a new friend in your life. And that may mean that some old friendships and places where you spent your time has to be put aside. And so let me just encourage you. By the way, last thing I just say with that is, sometimes the people around you can tell the seasons have changed in your life before you can. I think my wife probably knew before I did the last couple of job changes I had, because I just put my nose to the grindstone and was working, and I just hadn't noticed that things were changing. And it was no surprise to my wife when suddenly I realized I sensed maybe God wants me to do something new. It was obvious. And so if you're wondering if perhaps maybe a season's coming to the end of your life, take time to talk to the people around you who know you best, and you may be surprised at what they have to say. They may say, you know what, I've known for a long time that a change was coming. You just have seemed restless. You just not seemed content. The joy, the passion, the vision hasn't been there like it used to be. I just sensed that perhaps God was releasing you from what you were doing and getting you ready for something new. Well, let me just try to hit a question or two. There's a lot there. I hope if you really are interested in this, you'll take time to read the book, because I've just skimmed the surface of just the many different issues involved in that. But let me try to just catch a question or two. Joy asks, is it possible to choose to stay in a certain season because one is comfortable there? It is possible, and a lot of people do that. The problem sometimes is that you get stuck and the season goes sour for you. You see, I know people, for instance, who want to live in a perpetual springtime. They just love new stuff. They love the honeymoon. But when it gets to the summer season of work and labor, they're not interested. They're always got new ideas. Well, let's start this, let's start that, but they never finish anything. And after a while, you go sour. Same with winter. I know some people that get stuck in winter, and they lost a loved one. Maybe they're a widow, and of course that's an awful experience. But 15 years later, they're still grieving. They haven't moved on. They're still sad, and they've wasted many good years in their life because they didn't just embrace that season, get from it what they needed to, and say goodbye and then move on to a new springtime. You can't stay where you are, because and of course you may have some seasons you really like. It's sort of like the professional athlete that gets to harvest time, the fall season of their professional playing career, and they sign the most lucrative contract they ever will sign, and but then from that point on they start going downhill, and now they're the best, highest paid player, but they're not performing as well as some of the rookies on the team, and now they're just they're kind of weighing down the team with all the money that goes into someone who's not performing. You don't want to be that kind of person who stayed too long. Once that season is past, you've got to move on to the next season. Another question from Philip is, can we end up skipping seasons because of disobedience? I don't really know that you can necessarily skip a season. It's sort of like in nature. I mean, sometimes seasons can be shorter. Sometimes seasons you don't get everything out of it that you should. But for instance, to say, well, I'm going to skip winter and just go right to springtime. I don't know that you can do that. I think until some things come to an end in your life, God's not going to birth something new. If you don't work hard in summer, you'll have a harvest, but it won't be, what you reap is not going to be very noteworthy. So certainly how you handle one season will affect the next season, and will have huge implications, but I don't know that you can entirely skip a season. And I don't know, I think they all kind of follow in order. Alicia, hello Alicia, great Christian musician I've worked with before. How can a church gracefully help a pastor recognize his need to retire if he is in the winter season of ministry? Well, boy, I tell you what, that is a question I've dealt with a number of times. I've literally known pastors that came to a church with 200 people that are down to 15 people, and they still just say, there's a certain amount of pride where they just feel like it's not their fault. It's just people just don't want to come to church anymore. People just aren't making decisions anymore. People have stopped giving. And it's just so hard to recognize, no, it's me. It's just time for me to get out of the way. I'm not leading successfully anymore. Sometimes a spouse, a wife, sometimes has to say, honey, don't you just think it's time that maybe we move to a seniors ministry, or we try ministry in a different way? It doesn't mean we won't serve the Lord anymore. But look at the fruit. We've been in decline for over a decade. Honey, maybe it's time to step aside and let someone else see what they can do with this church. Sometimes you just have to be a loving person to step alongside. I'll just tell you, in all honesty, it usually doesn't go well. I've tried a couple times to try to help speak truth into people's lives. Most of the time, people don't receive it well. They get their feelings hurt. Do you know how much time I put into this place? I started this church and so on. But you know what I've had to realize? Because we don't want to hurt a pastor's feelings, we don't tell them the truth. And entire churches will die because we didn't want to hurt a pastor's feelings. And I just realized if someone has got to be hurt, it ought to be the person who stayed too long, not the poor people who are withering under a ministry that's not feeding them. So for the sake of the people, at some point you just have to say, look, we love you, we appreciate all that you've done, but we just feel, looking at where the church is at today, it's just obvious that we need fresh leadership here. And it's a hard thing to do. But for the sake of the church, sometimes you just have to do it anyway. And last question from Candace. How can you better balance a full relationship with God during a summer season? I feel like the busyness of this season is harder to connect with God at times. And boy, you're exactly right. When you're running kids to lessons and doctor's appointments and school appointments, and you've got your own work and responsibilities and everything else, it can be just crazy. And summer is one of those really busy times, I think, and certainly that is one of the challenges. And I think sometimes you literally just may have to put up with less sleep. You may have to be creative. You may have to stick in a Bible, turn on a Bible app on your phone while you're commuting kids back and forth. Or I learned just to take a book with me, or a Bible or something on my phone or in my hand. I kept a book in the side of my car during that season. So if I was waiting to pick up a kid at school, I could be reading. I didn't want to, I'm trying to find ways to seize every moment of time, just to try to maximize that, because early in the morning already I might be on duty till late at night. So you have to be creative. And that's also, I think, where it's great to, if you're a mother, for instance, or father, get around other Christians like that and ask what they do. Get ideas. Do you have an app that has a morning devotional I can just have on my phone while I've got my daughter in the early morning swim classes or whatever? Find ways to be creative. There's lots of technology and things available now that there didn't used to be. Sometimes you just have to get up earlier. But when in that season, I used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning just so I knew I've got time of silence. I just need quiet with me and God if I'm going to make it through the day. So it's not easy. There's sacrifice involved, but it's worth it. And I want to just encourage you. I want to also just say hey to Paige. And I know that Paige watches this with her mother, Lisa. And I know you're going through some health issues right now. So Paige, we're just praying for you and know you'll get through this. And also, let me just close by just encouraging you, if you've never been a part of the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, You can download a podcast, comes out every Tuesday morning. And next Monday at 12 noon Eastern, we're actually going to have our 100th episode, and we're going to do it live on YouTube. And so if you have listened to our podcast, or if you never have, tune in on YouTube next week. You can check the show notes for where to find that. And Sam Camp and I will be doing it live on video. And then you can also listen to it on Tuesday mornings, just like always. But it's a wonderful way of talking about how to take your leadership to another level, whether you're a parent, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a business person. And so join us. We'll be doing it live, taking questions, answering it on air. And so if you've got questions about leadership, join in. It'll be a lot of fun. So thanks again for joining me on this Tuesday morning devotional. Take time to think today, what season am I in right now? Am I in spring, summer, fall, winter? And each of them have their own challenges. That might explain why you're facing some of the things you're facing right now. It might help you understand also the path forward when you embrace the season you're in and let God do whatever work He wants to do in this time. But understand this, whatever season you're in, it will pass one day, and God will give you the next season. So enjoy this season fully, because there'll be another one coming, sure enough. It's been great to be with you. We'll see you next Tuesday.